What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday to you, a prime Thursday, if you will, because that is the type of time in which the Bengals will be playing their their final preseason game and the streaming platform in which you need to watch it, apparently. So happy to be with you on this Thursday talking about the Bengals' last preseason game coming up here against the Colts, a short trip from them. And this isn't an annual thing, but I mean, this is a pretty regular occurrence that these two teams end the preseason together just because of the geographical distance. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about Myles Murphy. We're going to talk about the roster. We're going to talk about Jamar Chase and some other things on this episode. I'm Anthony. He is John, rocking the clean Cincy hat. How you doing, bud?
Yeah, you can't see the sweat stains. I need to wash this thing in the sun lately. But that was a strong intro. I've been really bit. We've both been really busy today, and I've been a little drained. But now I'm energized. I'm ready to go.
You're psyched.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. We're in the home stretch here of the season actually starting. I don't listen to a ton of local sports talk radio as it, when it's football off season type of thing. And especially out my way, there's just not a lot of Bengals centric talk anyways to listen to. So I finally kind of started to get back in that groove earlier today. And here we go. The Bengals are set to take on the Colts this evening, and then they are going to prepare for the Patriots in week 1, where they are wearing the all orange jersey outfit that we talked about last week. And then, obviously in between, there's a lot of roster construction to talk about. So I think where we want to start with is kind of some not so great news. And that is Myles Murphy being injured along the defensive line. And what the Bengals, we'll talk about some roster battles and all that kind of stuff in a little bit. I mean, the reports are now, I think Max Murphy is his brother, right? On Twitter,
yeah.
It would seem. Yeah. So he's kind of said, okay, maybe ready week 1, maybe week 2. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN put out a report today that it's basically a 4 to 6 week injury with the knee sprain, the ligament sprain. So kind of dodged a big bullet. I kind of felt okay about it once you heard he was carted off, but he was kind of walking better than many were than many do when they tear a ligament in their knee. So I was kind of encouraged at that point, but still, man, this line is getting decimated. If Murphy is to miss that first game or 2, maybe even 3 at this point, that's going to sting. And of course, you lost Cam Sample for the year. So pass rushers at a premium. What's next for the Bengals in your estimation?
Oh man, I mean, Sample, yeah, he tore his Achilles in like the first day of August. Jeff Gunter retired out the blue like this time last week.
Right.
So they were down to 5 players healthy who you'd be comfortable making the team, but that included Myles Murphy. So now it's 2 starters in Hendrickson and Hubbard, Joseph Asai, who's clearly the third edge at the moment, and then Cedric Johnson, who's one of their 6th-round picks, who, in the summer you would think, hey, like maybe he has a chance to beat out one of Asai and Sample. Those guys entering contract years. You want to keep the rookies on a 4-year deal. Now they have no choice but to keep Cedric Johnson. And it's good that he's looked good in his 2 preseason games and in training camp and everything like that. But that's it. Like outside of that, it's an undrafted guy in Justin Blazik, someone they just signed in Joshua Pryor, and that's pretty much It's pretty much it in terms of depth. They have like 3 edges who are going to play against the Colts Thursday night, maybe 4 if they move one of those guys over there. They need help on the outside of the team right now, because if Murphy misses the first quarter of the season, which by the report indicates that they want to be conservative, so probably he's going to be close. He's going to be back closer to probably like week 5 rather than week 3 if we're looking at the 4 to 6 week time frame. So
Yeah.
I mean, like, the waiver wire exists for a reason, right? When teams cut their rosters down to 53 players either get waived if they haven't accrued 4 seasons, or they get straight up released. But every team has a chance to claim the players who are waived within like 20 hours or so after the initial cut down deadline at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So the Bengals are 18th in the waiver wire order, and it would be shocking to me if they didn't put in at least 2 claims for an edge, because typically 5 is the number that they roll with to begin the season. And right now they only have 4, I think, on the team who are even worthy of a roster spot.
And it stinks is because the Bengals have actually tried to, put some other things in place depth wise for the edge rusher position group, because Hubbard and Hendrickson have just taken so many snaps these last handful of years. And granted, Hendrickson in particular has been very, very effective. Hubbard has been effective in spells as well. They're 2 very good edge defenders to have on your team, your starting edge defenders. But I mean, you got to have rotational help in there. And this is put the record on loop, I guess. We've said this the last 3 off seasons. Big season for Joseph Osai. I think you had put out an article on A to Z Sports, if I'm not mistaken, John, saying that basically he should just not even play a snap this evening. And I mean, his role now looms large. They may put in a waiver wire claim at someone at this position. You've also got some questions potentially at running back. I know we're talking defensive ends, but position groups, you're talking about maybe going light there. If you like the 3 that you have and you roll with that, you had a season-ending injury to Chris Evans as well there. So there are some questions to be answered. And I think also the biggest question to me, especially with his performance against the Chicago Bears, and first week as well, Tanner McLaughlin entering the conversation pretty well into the tight end position group. He's a late day 3 pick. I think he's round 6. You've got Eric Gall, he's a round 4 pick. The Bengals really, really like him, so he's not going anywhere. So you have to get creative on this roster. Do you label Drew Sample as like an H-back, fullback type of player, and then you keep the other 4 more traditional type of tight ends? Do you label Gesicki kind of a big slot wide receiver? I don't know, but there's a good problem that's occurring in the tight end position group, whereas when you're looking across the defensive line, especially the edge defenders, that's a bad problem you're experiencing because of injuries, retirements, etc.
I mean, the whole group is just, it's not deep right now. It's very thin. You have McKinley Jackson, who's still recovering from his own knee sprain. That's like been 3 weeks in the making. We don't really know when he's going to be back, because he hasn't been back practicing since. I believe Jay Tufele, Dominic Davis, like those guys are back. Tufele played against the Bears in the preseason. Yeah. So, typically 9 to 10 is the number that we'll go with at defensive line. 11 if they're really strong there, but they don't have enough. Again, they don't have enough bodies there to go deep there. So naturally, they're going to go deep at those spots, like you mentioned. Like 5 tight ends is definitely in the realm of possibilities now if they're going to be weak at some other spots. And of course, the initial 53 is not what the 53 looks like even when week 1 rolls around. There's going to be other moves. There's going to be potentially trades. There's going to be players put on injured reserve. There's a new rule with that, though, Anthony, which I think definitely applies to Myles Murphy. So if a player, up to 2 players can be placed on injured reserve the day of roster cutdowns to be designated to return, which is like a 4-week type period where they have
a short-term IR. Yeah.
Right. And it used to be where like teams will cut like a player, like they did this with Michael Johnson a couple years ago. They cut Michael Johnson and then they brought him back on a 1-year deal in order to keep a player on the team so that then they could put him on injured reserve. It used to be you had to be placed on the 53-man roster initially, then to be placed on injured reserve. This time, you can just place the player, in this case would be Myles Murphy, on injured reserve the day of roster cutdowns without having to have him be out for the entire season. Now, obviously, guys like Cam Sample, Deontay Smith, Chris Evans, they're already placed on injured reserve before the cutdown day, so their seasons are over. But this is a way to just make sure that you preserve Miles Murphy, give him the time that you need without having to jump through a bunch of hoops in terms of roster gymnastics. It's a good rule that the NFL has put in, but it's probably one that they'll use.
It probably will be. And then, you look at it. I know one free agent name that everybody's kind of kicking around is Yannick Ngakoue, as maybe a guy that could come in. I know Carl Lawson was recently released, and then I believe he signed with the Cowboys shortly after his release there. So, these are premium positions, right? I mean, this is a premium position. So I don't know how slim the pickings will be or won't be for the Bengals out there, but their defense suffered a lot of problems last year, a lot of injuries, a lot of issues last year, and the free agency attrition, of course, as well. But I mean, now they're running into the injury bug, which is really biting them. And they again, we talk about you can't have the slow start. You can't come out of the gates. That Chiefs game is a high profile game, even though it's week 2. You can't afford a lot of stumbling blocks. And unfortunately, they're having to try and navigate around potential stumbling blocks because of the injuries.
Yeah. And even if they do add an edge, like the most recent example of this was Wyatt Ray, who I don't know if anyone really remembers him anymore, but he was claimed, I believe it was 2021, along with a cornerback in Nick McLeod. And Wyatt Ray ended up playing like 200 snaps in 16 games throughout that season. So typically, like, you never really know what's going to happen and how these players are going to be coming off of waivers. I mean, Samaje Perine is a waiver claim, right? So an opportunity opens up. In this case, Bengals are suffering a ton of injuries at the edge position. But like you said, it's a position where teams don't really want to give away or, subject their talented players at this specific position to waivers because of situations like this. It's just a position that ends up being banged up and other teams have needs for it. So the pickings may be slim, if you will, and that could lead to a potential BJ Hill type trade. Maybe who knows, like maybe a position like cornerback or tight end where they feel like they have too many players who can make the team. And if they want to make a trade for an edge defender, like that could be this year's situation like that. But of course, the right deal has to open up and has to be a player that they feel like they can move on from pretty comfortably, like they did with Billy Price back in 2021. So they have to get creative regardless. And that's what the waiver wire is for. That's why the rule is in place and they have to be active with it.
So, I mean, other additions to potential position groups. I mean, I'm not seeing too many. I mean, maybe you add in another backup offensive lineman if you end up going light there, but I think it's more pressing need at this point, which is largely along the defensive line, maybe an additional running back or one to supplant one on the roster type of thing. And I mean, tight end, you're pretty set. I think wide receiver, you're pretty set. Across the board, I think you're pretty set at most of the spots. There's probably 2 or 3 that are in that conversation of, hey, really look at the waiver wire for some help here.
The Samaje Perine avenue opened up immediately when Chris Evans got hurt, and Perine is still looked at, according to people who know in Denver, as the odd man out of that group. If they want to roll with 4, odds are he's going to be available. He's a vested veteran. He can just sign with the team immediately if it comes to that. But again, like, when you have 5 tight ends who are worthy of making the team, if you want to go like 9 deep at offensive line and you want to keep your normal amount of defensive backs and defensive linemen, maybe running back is the position where you go light in 3, especially when you have 2 guys who are going to take, split touches in terms of the offensive workload and whatnot. And you just want to have Trayvon Williams as your backup. But this team traditionally keeps 4. So if they want Samaje Perine to rejoin the group, like, I think that will be a definite possibility with him potentially on the way out of Denver.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to because we're going to talk a little bit more about roster battles and that sort of thing. Let's talk about some Ja'Marr Chase stuff. Chase has been sitting in camp and all that kind of stuff. A little bit of the Ayuk thing going on there. Not of course the trade stuff, but theoretically, well, he's got 2 more years this year and the 5th year option thing. The Bengals like to get these done obviously sooner rather than later, especially for their star core players. I put out a tweet last night that just kind of talked about and it showed some of the contract extensions that the Bengals have paid their wide receiver ones and even a wide receiver two in Hushmanzada. I mean, they pay their wideouts, they pay their star wideouts. That's not really a thing. But I mean, Richard Skinner of WLWT in Cincinnati, I believe, put out some information on, was it Mo Egger's show or I can't remember exactly whose it was, but
ESPN 1530.
Yeah. And he put out some information basically saying that it's, 160 million deal that he was potentially seeking and that sort of thing. So there's, kind of a right or wrong. I think it's actually probably right in terms of, player looking out for players and player standpoint, et cetera. But, players are looking to leapfrog each other as, the top paid guy, the top paid guy, the top paid guy. So what do you think on this? What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, we are at that point where I think the topic of his threat of missing games needs to be addressed. It's still just a threat that I don't think is going to end up fulfilling, just because if he doesn't play and he doesn't report or anything like that, I mean, he's already reported, he's already at practice technically. If he doesn't play, then he can forfeit the $3.5 million, or at least part of the $3.5 million that he earned as a roster bonus at the beginning of this month. It would be equal to, according to Andre Parada, about 1.9 million, which is not an insignificant chunk of change based off of the current salary that he's making. But of course, the whole reason why he wants this deal is because he is only set to make about $1 million in terms of just base salary this year, on top of the $3.5 million that he just rolled in. So he has to play in order to avoid the Bengals from potentially doing that. And if he decides to sit out games, I think the Bengals will be definitely in their right to get that money back and recuperate it. That's just what the rules are, and they're allowed to do that. So that's the whole thing about him sitting out. It's just not going to happen. Players just don't do that. The only way that it could feasibly work out for him is if he returns to practice and has a mysterious injury where he can then use that as an excuse. That's what Jalen Ramsey did a couple years ago, I believe, with the Rams. Something happened with Jonathan Taylor last year where it was a fake injury or something like that when he wanted to trade in, and he eventually got a contract extension. So if he's not practicing, he can't claim that he's getting hurt. So he just has to play. He has to suck it up. But in regards to that contract, people are blown away by it because obviously $40 million a year in terms of new money for a receiver is pretty crazy, considering Justin Jefferson got $35 million a year in terms of new money. But the difference is Jefferson got that deal with 1 year left on his contract, and he's set to make this year like around $20 million. So in terms of just the total deal that Jefferson is getting, it's roughly $160 million over 5 years. The Jamar Chase deal, if it is true, we don't know if it's true. If that's what he wants, that's what the Bengals give him, he would get about $186 million over 6 years. So the average annual value of the total contract, it pretty much is the same as Justin Jefferson. That new money is just a way of getting up to that level. And I think everybody who knows anything about Jamar Chase can say that he deserves pretty much the same deal as Justin Jefferson. Of course, players in this position typically try to get more. And of course, in terms of new money, he is asking for more than Jefferson. That's just the natural evolution of positional markets in a league where the cap is always rising. But in this case, it's just getting to that level. And of course, he deserves it. And of course, the Bengals would benefit from doing this now, because a 4-year deal with 2 years still on his deal currently, that gives them 6 years of roster control. They have 6 years left to Joe Burrow. It makes sense to, align those pairings up perfectly in terms of timing. So yeah, if that is the deal that he wants, then the Bengals should absolutely do this. But of course, we don't know. We don't know if there's any other type of nuances in the negotiations that need to be worked out. We don't know if it's the guaranteed money, of course, that could be holding it up. There's a lot that we still don't know, but there is 17 days until the start of the season, and deadlines for action.
Yeah. Again, I think there are people that are impatient. This was the same kind of impatience that we saw with, when's Burrow's deal going to be done? When's Burrow's deal going to be done? That sort of thing. And it took a little longer than people expected, even though other deals from his contemporaries were in place. It took a little longer than expected, but it got done. Personally, the way this team values and has paid its top wide receivers, even though this is astronomical money for a team like the Bengals, I think they step up to the plate. I mean, I don't think you really, I don't think you have a choice. So it just may not happen on, our preferred timeline, Chase's preferred timeline, etc. I would hate to see this kind of, drag out into the next offseason, because then guess what? That price likely, scoots up again next summer when we're talking about an extension type of thing. So, again, the Bengals have Chase for this year. He would be on the 5th-year option next year. And if they do not get a deal done either this offseason or next, they would likely franchise tag him, I would think, which is not a preferred method. So there are still years to go with Chase on the team, but obviously he wants a new deal. The team wants to keep him around long term. And so I don't know. I'm still just, and I don't, me, I'm not always the super optimist when it comes to all these kinds of things and Bengals and in general, but I've just seen the track record. They paid Chad, they paid Carl Pickens before him, they paid Hushmanzada after Chad, so they got a big contracts together. Basically, they paid AJ. I mean, and those guys earned it. So Chase has earned it. I think they step up to the plate and do so. I just don't know when.
I've said it since last month. I mean, he's the Joe Burrow of wide receivers. Whether or not he's the best in the game, he will make the most when it's his turn, and he wants it to be his turn now. So that's just what it is. And the Bengals bent their rules for Joe Burrow. They will do the same for Jamar Chase. I do think that they may have been blindsided by all this happening now. I think they expected all this to happen next year when he was entering a contract year, which is what happened with AJ Green. That's when he got his deal. But I have seen, I don't know. I've seen people, again, like they're attached to the $40 million a year number in terms of new money. And again, they're not looking at the whole picture here. And they think, okay, that's just too much. Like, he doesn't deserve that much in terms of average annual value. It could be 36 or it could be 35.5, which I think is what we have in the comments section. But again, if he's the Joe Burrow of wide receivers, if he's like a consensus top option that is deserving to reset the market, what is the difference between like 36 a year and 40 a year? At that point, like you said, like the leverage is all in Chase's corner. That's why he's doing this now. The Bengals don't have a choice. They can't let him and T. Higgins go. Of course, that can't happen this year because they have 2 years left of his contract ready, and everything. But like at that point, like it's a gigantic contract no matter which way you look at it. And this is, again, totally fair in accordance to his value, in accordance to what the market is, in accordance to how the cap continues to rise. You just got to do it. So yeah, you can complain about how huge the number actually is. Of course, we say this with every contract. In 2 years, it's going to look like a bargain. And maybe this is the final receiver contract where the bubble may burst and you may see kind of a drop off, which is what's happening to cornerbacks at the moment. But like, again, he's the type of talent that you just pay the price, and the Bengals will eventually do that. It just could be in 2 weeks. It could be in 12 months. We don't know.
So the Bengals have always, I shouldn't say always, but they have largely been, they've largely been a team that, how do I say this diplomatically? They play the waiting game. And they see they did it in free agency for years. They've been far more aggressive lately, but they wait till a lot of the frenzies and all that stuff. They really are strategic in the data that they gather in order to pay players, sign players to new contracts, all that kind of stuff. So that being said, you've got the Ayuk situation, right? That's lingering out there. CeeDee Lamb is also wanting a new deal. So it appears to me, whether that's Chase's camp or the Bengals, but we've seen the Bengals, they did it with Burrow. They've let some of the dominoes fall, right? Hurts and Herbert. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we have the framework for it. Is that, in your estimation, what, to me, that seems to be what is going to be driving this thing, right? Maybe they are waiting for one or both of those guys to get their respective deals, and then Chase hops in, gets the highest paid, etc. I don't think it's, we're not going to pay him that, or I mean, maybe it is not that specifically, but they would pay him probably close to whatever the respective number that he is asking for. It's more playing the waiting game and making sure that the deal is constructed in a way that, maybe makes him the highest paid, but also is in line with other deals that are comparable players to him.
I think that's what Albert Breer was alluding to with his report. I believe it was like last week, where
Yeah.
Lamb and Ayuk situations may have an impact with this, just to get the totality of the market all situated. Of course, I think whatever those guys get, they're not going to eclipse Jefferson, and Jamar Chase wants to be in that range of getting just over Justin Jefferson again because he's in that tier of receiver and whatnot. So I kind of agree with that, but also at the same time, like the frame, like the benchmark has been set with Jefferson for sure, and that seemed to be like the big domino that had to fall. Of course, they probably thought that Lamb and Ayuk, those situations would be over by now, but I also think that like with Chase sitting out, I think people have also the fact that it's still going on, people maybe think that that has something to do with like his frustration with the team or whatnot. But I think still at the end of the day, it's just him preserving himself, wanting this to get
Protecting
done.
himself. Yep.
Yeah, like there's no, I wouldn't say there's probably any animosity between both sides and whatnot. And it could just be the Bengals, like you said, trying to just get everything in order so that, like the best possible deal does come together. And these things unfortunately do take time. I really think that like just in the offseason in general, if people, once you get to September and everything is past you, everything starts to make sense. But when you're in free agency and they haven't signed a player at this position, or this whole thing is happening in terms of waiting for a contract to happen and a player not practicing, once September comes around and everyone is here and the whole team is set, everything does start to make sense at that point. But of course, when we see the process unfold with our own eyes, we have more access than ever before. 20 years ago, we didn't have all this stuff and all these reports coming out from social media and everything like that. We have so much more ability to see the ins and outs of everything kind of unfold, and it does look ugly at times and it does feel like nothing's happening, but things are happening and they do tend to work out for the best.
We're talking about the Bengals, who are let's be honest, a smaller market team. Their value as a franchise isn't as high as your Dallas Cowboys type of thing. So when you are talking about a mega deal with Joe Burrow, when you were talking about a mega deal with Jamar Chase, a 100, potentially 150, $160 million deal with Jamar Chase, making both of those players the highest paid, potentially the highest paid players at their respective positions, that's a big pill to swallow as the Bengals, right? So they want to make sure that all the due diligence is done. They have all the data. They have everything. I mean, it's a big deal for them. Quite honestly, I mean, it's just a big deal. Like you said, these things take time. It takes a little more time with a team like the Bengals, who operate
It
the way
always
that they
does.
do, and who operate the way that they do, and who that also, again, spends the way they spend and all that kind of stuff. But again, I go back to star players at skill positions, particularly on offense. The Bengals have traditionally paid them as they deserved it, and maybe even some that didn't deserve it, they paid them. So I'm confident that this is going to get done. It's just a matter of when. Maybe as preseason ceases and they make their final roster cuts and all, maybe once all that dust settles, maybe they really ramp up negotiations. I tend to think, and we had the same conversation last year, John, I tend to think the framework's probably there. Right. I mean, I think there's how much of it is sketched out. I don't know, but I think that both sides have an idea as to, this is kind of the confines and we're working in, and this is what we want.
The last thing I'll say about this, and I felt so strongly about this, I wrote about it at the beginning of the month, and I think it still applies. Until we start hearing the same things reported that we did with T. Higgins in terms of his agent going to the media and, kind of laying out everything that's happening, until we get to that point, silence is good. It's what happened with Joe Burrow. Like both sides had an agreement that, hey, like we're going to keep this in house, and that's how the process is going to unfold. I can be confident that that's what's happening between Chase's representation in the Bengals. We haven't had any inflammatory reports come out about the negotiations about potential prices. We had one thing from Richard Skinner about what his camp potentially wants. And again, we don't know if that's true or not. It does make sense if that's the case. But the Bengals in Paycor Stadium is a combination of a black hole and Fort Knox. Very rarely does things exit that stadium. And obviously, guys like Adam Schefter aren't getting any information. He's been blacklisted at this point from the things that he's said about the team. Silence is good in terms of progress. So until we get to that point where it was with T Higgins early in the offseason, I think things are just kind of going accordingly.
I love that. that you said, what you said about silence, because when there's noise, it's usually not good news, right? It's they're at an impasse. They're blah, blah. So the mystery around it, I can understand why people are frustrated around a lack of details, but like you said, that sometimes can be a good thing, because that is, maybe there's a lot going on behind the curtains than people realize. So yeah, at any rate, Chase, that's the contract latest with him. I don't know about you. I don't anticipate him sitting out week 1.
No.
I don't think I don't think that's even a thing. It's more try and get the deal done going forward. But let's talk a little bit about the game against the Colts coming up here in just a few hours. Again, I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, now part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Our show, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and the great Willie Lutz, as well as Talking Football with Bengal Jim and friends. And they had Elizabeth Blackburn on their program earlier this week, so hopefully you go check that out. That was an entertaining interview. She is always just smiling and energetic and positive. I love her approach and outlook, and it goes right in line with her director of strategy and engagement type of thing. I mean, she's just so go check out that interview. That is up on our podcast channel. You got to go find the Believe in Cincy. We'll put that link in the live chat and in the comments section as well for the show. But you got to go find the Believe in Cincy, BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel for all of those shows. Please resubscribe to that so we can, and leave a review if you can too. That'd be awesome. And then if you like what we're doing on YouTube, if you like watching us yak in person on videos, go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Underneath John, on that bottom right-hand side, there is a show icon. Click that, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when we go live and when new content is available. And if you can give a thumbs up to us, we would appreciate that. You can also check us out streaming on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, Cincy Jungle's Twitter account, and a couple of other Twitter accounts. So appreciate all of the support, and we'll keep grinding towards the regular season here. John, let's move on here. We talked, I mean, this kind of bridges back into our first segment a little bit, but this game tonight is the one where, there's some back end roster guys that are fighting for spots, be it on the team that they're currently on or another team, right? So there's a lot of auditions here. To me right now, I think, kind of the hot name of someone who has seemingly played himself onto the roster is Njong Meta, right? I mean, you would think that there's a lot to like in those first 2 preseason games. And he, when he senses where the ball's going to be, I mean, he gets to it, right? So there's I think that has been someone who has played themselves onto the roster. Are there others that you're looking at tonight where you go, yeah, that, so-and-so needs to do this at this position group or show this, or are you not expecting many other surprises until waiver wire time?
Yeah, I think it's the number in terms of players who have already made the team is closer to 50 rather than 40. I don't think there's that many spots that remain open. It just might have to do with how many they want to keep at certain spots. Like, I think Tanner McLaughlin, again, like, he's good enough and he's done enough to make the team. But if they only keep 4, I mean, I don't really know if they're going to cut Tanner Hudson. I think he's earned too much trust, and his connection with Burrow is good enough to where they want to extend that relationship, even though, like, they could probably get him back on the practice squad. Whereas if they cut McLaughlin, he's subject to waivers as a draft pick, and they might lose him there. So that's something that needs to be worked out. Jalen Davis, I think, is probably the second best player on the roster bubble right now. And again, it's just a numbers game. Do you want to keep 6 cornerbacks when you're probably already keeping 5 safeties, and maybe you want to keep 5 linebackers? Like, that's a pretty deep defensive group right there already. But again, Jalen Davis hasn't done anything wrong in training camp with the preseason. He's been around for 4 years, and he's made the team each of the past 3 off seasons because he's always been good and reliable. So again, like, he's good enough to make the team, but he might be subject to just the numbers game because Josh Newton and DJ Turner are good enough backups. And then, like you said, Muma Jongmeta is the pronunciation of his name, and he's just, I mean, he's all the good parts of Vontaze Burfict in another undrafted linebacker body, right? He's not very athletic. He ran like a 4.9 at the combine, and he got exposed in space against the Bears, and that's something that's going to be a theme with him going forward in his career. But getting downhill, reading his run fits, driving through tackles, it is such a joy to watch quality linebacker play. And while Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt are really solid players, like there's just a difference, I think, when you see like that physicality from John Meta. And it's also, I mean, he has a lot to prove as an undrafted guy trying to make the team. And I think we're seeing all of that kind of unfold. Definitely good enough to make the team. Definitely one of the 5 best linebackers. 5 is still, it's like the most that they could keep at that position because they only play 2 during games outside of maybe Davis Gaither playing against the Ravens. So like those 3 guys are the ones to watch. And if you want to include a 4th, Jackson Kirkland, a guy who's played left guard and then left tackle because of how bad Jackson Carman has been at left tackle. And he survived out there against the Bears. He played decently well at a position that he hasn't really repped at a lot. So is he the 9th offensive lineman? If they want to keep 9, like that, those are the names to watch for sure.
So because I think everybody, including Ted Karras, the guy who is ahead of him on the depth chart, everybody's raving about Matt Lee. I think he's one of, if not the best performing interior offensive lineman or center by PFF metrics. So he has been playing very, very well. I think you have a hard time keeping him off the roster. So what does that mean for, in your estimation, for guys like Trey Hill? And I mean, are those guys getting pushed out, or because of the tackle situation and, with Mims? And I don't know. How do you kind of see all of that shaking out?
I honestly think Matt Lee's already made the team. Like, I think in a similar way to like Dax Hill taking all the reps as the starting cornerback since week 1 of the preseason, that's been the case with Matt Lee at center, or at least backup center. He's been taking all the reps with the second team. He played the entire game against the Bears and looked great out there, even against their starters. So I think he's won that competition, that started this competition to be the backup center along with Trey Hill. I think Trey Hill can still make the team if they keep 9, but you're looking at 5 starters, and then let's just assume that Trent Brown is the starter just because Maurice Mims is hurt. You have Mims as your swing tackle to start. Matt Lee is your backup center. Cody Ford is like your swing guard tackle type. And then that 9th spot is between, I think, Jackson Kirkland and Trey Hill. Now, Trey Hill had like 3 flags against the Bears, but he does offer versatility at center and guard. And if you want another guy who can snap and play all 3 interior spots, whereas with Kirkland, he's more of that Cody Ford type where he can go to guard to tackle. Like, I think that's where they make the final decision at offensive line. Me personally, I don't know if 9 is the right number. I feel like you have strengths at other positions where maybe you want to go with 8. But if they want to keep 9, I think Kirkland has done enough to win that job or win that final spot over Trey Hill. Okay,
I'm with you on that one there. Do you think any of the running backs that Noah Kane and do you think any of them sneak on? I don't think there's been enough wow stuff from them that and it's not knocking him. It's hard to get continuity and all kinds of stuff. There just hasn't been those moments where you go, oh wow, that guy entered the conversation. It's just kind of been okay.
Right. Yeah, I think if there's a 4th running back, it's someone like Pirine. Like, I think Elijah Collins screams practice squad. Noah Kane has done, I guess, less. He's just behind him in the order. So I was excited about both those guys potentially doing something in the preseason, but like you said, there just hasn't been a lot of opportunities. Blocking's not that good. So yeah, I don't think that they're on board with keeping them on as a 4th. If there is a 4th, I think it's going to be someone like Pirine for sure.
Any surprises you see coming up in terms of possible cuts? And I think the surprises will probably not. That'll probably come with waiver wire stuff. I don't think it's going to come on the actual cut down day. I think it may come with an additional person that gets added to the roster after a waiver wire thing. But is there anyone out there where you go, well, maybe this guy isn't as safe as I originally thought?
I don't know, man. Like I feel like, I don't even want to say, like, Trent Irwin is obviously safe. You're just trying to think about like their other receivers that have looked good in training camp and everything like that. But like he's probably in line to be like wide receiver 3 at this point. Tyson Anderson, maybe, just because like they love Dijon Anthony, and that would be 5 safeties that they would keep. There's probably going to be some type of surprise cut, right? Like Zach Carter, I think is definitely still on the roster bubble, but just because there's been so many injuries along the defensive line, he's just one of the guys that has stayed healthy. I guess he would be surprising to this point, even if, like, again, the tape has not been promising. You would think that they would keep someone that's been in the system for going on 3 years now. So maybe he would classify as a surprising cut. Like Matt Lee would definitely at this point be a surprise cut for me. Like beyond just the draft status, he's outplayed Trey Hill, and I don't think there's any logic with that. So him getting cut, I think, would be surprising. I guess Jackson Carman staying on the team would be like a surprising decision if they were to cut like Jackson Kirkland, for example. So there's going to be probably one, I guess, and maybe John Meta is like a surprise cut. Maybe they keep a guy like Shaka Hayward, who's got one more year of experience and has looked in his own right. He has looked promising in this preseason. So something like that, I think.
What about how are you feeling about Jay Tufele? He was a guy who's popped in there and been valuable in spells in the regular season, but again, we're talking about depth issues on the defensive line, and I don't know. He missed time this summer, right? So, how are you feeling about him?
He's right there, I think, just because he has experience as a nose, and I mean, which nose tackle do they have who's healthy right now? It's just Travis Bell, Dominique Davis, Carlos Davis, guys that you would, take it or leave it at this point. And that's, I think, going to be another position where they look at the waiver wire. It's going to depend on where McKinley Jackson is. And even if he's healthy for week 1, how much of a workload do you want to throw on him after he missed the past month of practice?
Right.
Exactly. There's got to be some type of depth there. And yeah, like after week 1, when Tufele was still hurt, I thought he had a really good chance of making the team just because of how Zach Carter has looked. And Zach Carter's not a nose either. So just because he has experience at that spot and he hasn't looked terrible, I guess, like he's still definitely in the conversation for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's a ton of surprises in store, but it's more, tight end groups making me nervous because I want to keep all those guys. I mean, I think they all bring you something good there. I don't know if you try and stash one on the practice squad. I don't know if they'll last there. So they've got some hard decisions to make there. But for the most part, I think, most of the position groups, particularly starting spots, are settled and they know what they're doing. So tonight there may be some more auditions from some of these guys to get onto the Bengals roster, but might also be an audition to go elsewhere. Just quickly before we start wrapping up a little bit, what are you looking for out of this one? I know there's kind of different goals and different aims. For me, obviously it's always health, right? But I would like somebody, there's 2 things for me. One, I would like somebody to show up as, maybe down the depth chart a little bit as someone where you go, oh, maybe there's a little pass rush sizzle there. Maybe they give Cedric Johnson a little bit more time and you go, hey, maybe this guy can be relied upon going forward in a rotational basis, and can give you a little something. The other thing, John, I said this last week, and last week's game was miserable. Score points. I mean, score that. If you go back and look, I said it last week, between the last like 3-4 preseasons, the Bengals are not scoring points. And I know it's preseason, doesn't matter. The wins and losses don't matter, but man, oh man, they're losing a bunch of games. They're losing by wide margins, and they scored 3 points last week. So, I mean, it's like, score some points.
It's always good, right? Get the fans at least something to go home with, right?
Man, I mean, come on.
But yeah, it is a home game, and you want to see some excitement. You want to have people do care about the game. The funniest thing about the joint practice this week was all the Bengals defenders clowning Anthony Richardson and just calling him out right after play, saying this guy doesn't throw to his receivers. He only throws the spots. Throw the damn ball, BJ Hill yelled. Well, now Richardson's going up against backups. How pissed off is he right now at the Bengals? Like, I want to see if Richardson can come back and if the Bengals second string defense, which last week forced 3 straight 3-and-outs against the number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams before Williams did Caleb Williams things, like they look good against starting offense in the Bears. Can they do it again against another starting offense in the Colts, who by all reports looked completely constipated in practice, but the game situation is different, and Richardson maybe has a chip on his shoulder. I want to see Joseph Ossai not touch the field because of just the incredibly thin state that the edge defender spot is in at this point. But that leaves them with Cedric Johnson, Justin Blazek, Joshua Pryor. Maybe you have Zach Carter on the edge. There's got to be someone else that you can just put out there for a couple snaps, but those guys are going to get plenty of run and they're going to be gassed at the end of the game. But I think it's just something that they have to do. They cannot afford to suffer another major injury at that spot.
Yeah. We kind of talked about this, of course, Mr. Whisper. Appreciate you. Am I alone in thinking we'll be active on cutdown day? No. We talked about this a little bit, but wanted to acknowledge the compliment and thank you for the super chat there. Yeah. So no, I think you're not alone. I think we're all in agreement that the Bengals will probably make a move or two. It's just a matter of who is going to be on the active roster for like a day and then gets the marching orders there. But thank you very much. Appreciate you always engaging what we're doing, etc. So appreciate that. Let's start closing up. John, we do drop Mike. We do remember him or remember them or whatever. I've got kind of a one that doesn't really fit in either category, but it was a talking point that I started thinking about today. And granted, I have to credit the Colin Cowherd show. Jason McIntyre was filling in for Colin Cowherd, but he was kind of talking about, by the way, McIntyre, who hasn't always been super complimentary about the Bengals, has them as his AFC Super Bowl pick to go to the Super Bowl and basically one of his top teams to be able to supplant the Chiefs in the postseason to go to the Super Bowl. But there's kind of some conversation topics largely centered around the Pittsburgh Steelers about, not only the longevity and the success of Tomlin and the Steelers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of got me down this weird, but McIntyre was talking about how they need to adapt, right? You got to adapt out of the Ben Roethlisberger era. And obviously they haven't really drafted many quarterbacks or ones that have been effective post Ben Roethlisberger. So, they need to adapt their way of thinking, and obviously talking about the ineffectiveness of both Fields and Russell this preseason, that sort of thing. So it started kicking this can down the road. You've got Harbaugh also in Baltimore. There was a conversation he had later in the show talking about, when is Baltimore's potential championship window closing with Lamar Jackson, et cetera. Obviously, AFC North centric line of thinking, I started going down the line of thinking, okay, well, what, let's just say Tomlin has a subpar season. The Steelers have a subpar season this year and, they part ways, right? Or Harbaugh in a couple of years that, they part ways. The other side of this discussion was, Bill Belichick potentially coming back next year to coach all of this. I'm kind of rambling, but it started a line of thinking saying, okay, well, teams would probably line up to get Bill Belichick on their sidelines, even despite what happened in his last season in New England. I would think if Harbaugh was to leave the Ravens, a lot of teams would still line up. And I wonder about Tomlin. I still think there would be a lot of teams that would line up for him. But it started making me think about Marvin Lewis and him never getting that other shot somewhere. He was extremely unlucky timing wise because the league was pivoting to the younger offensive minded head coaches, not so much the defensive minded head coach. And the Super Bowl that he was leaning on as a defensive coordinator was decades before. I just started just randomly kind of thinking, man, I mean, what do you think Marvin would have done on another team if he got another head coaching shot? Would it have been kind of the same old, Mike Shanahan and Dennis Green and these guys that had modicums of success, but the bar was always there? Or I don't know. I just started thinking about that. I'm like, I kind of want to talk to John about this on the show.
I think Marvin worked phenomenally when he was hired by the Bengals because at that time, like the team just needed a competent voice to lead the group. But also, I think how old was Marvin when he got hired? Like he could have been older than like 42, right? He was like he was early 40s at most, right? He was a relatively young hire at the time.
He
right?
was, yeah.
And I think that factor has only like become more important nowadays. Like you're starting to see a lot of like millennial, almost we're very close to the first Gen C head coach in the NFL coming up in a couple of years. I think relatability to the current crop of players matters so much more. We saw it firsthand with Brian Flores and Tua Tagovailoa, where Flores tried to do like the whole Belichick thing with that regime, and it just completely just tanked his chances of lasting in Miami. He ruined his relationship with Tua. I think Marvin is still he's on the cusp. I mean, he's like almost 70 now. Like I don't
65.
know.
So
Yeah,
he would have
like
been he would have been like 44 when he was hired. Yeah.
right. Yeah. I think the generational gap is important. And that's why, guys like Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick, even Mike Vrabel to an extent, they're just not really in high demand right now, because I think teams are really just looking at the next generation of coaches and minds and people who can relate to just a new age of players who are, who are exercising these holdouts and embodying player empowerment. And I don't know if Marvin Lewis would do as well nowadays, whereas, 20 years ago it was completely different player base and a completely different environment. If you were to get hired like maybe a couple years ago, maybe he latched on to a team like the early 2000s Bengals that just needed some competency and just a fresh face to just turn things around and everything. But I don't know. I feel like that time is kind of past, and I think teams are just looking for the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, I mean, super random thought, but obviously a little bit relevant, because Harbaugh and Tomlin are two of the most longest tenured coaches in the league right now at their respective positions. They've been very, very successful. Marvin was pretty successful. So I just, I get a little surprised sometimes when I'm like, man, he never got another shot. He just never got. And I thought maybe a team would have been like, hey, let's give him a short-term thing and see if he could rebuild us and maybe take us a little further than he could take the Bengals. I don't know. But you make a good point about resonating with, maybe being a younger coach and resonating with the players of a, certain age group. Maybe that's to it. But anyway, kind of kicking a can down a random road, but that's one thing I just kind of wanted to bring up, because I heard some things on a talk show today. But the other thing I have is that it is Mohamed Sanu's birthday, and obviously you see him you saw him on the montage on the opening and closing. He was on our show for not this year's draft, but last year, and he's got the Project Africa charity going, so please support that. But happy birthday, Mo. I'd like to say friend of the show, right? So happy birthday, Mohamed Sanu.
I have nothing. My throat is like dry as hell right now, but I just wanted to shout out a funny comment from Dan the Man. Joe Burrow needs to watch footage of Peyton Manning. He collapsed like the French army when contact seemed imminent. I know Anthony's a history buff. I'm fond of histories too, so that made me smile.
Joe, this one right here, Joe needs to watch footage. Yeah. That's actually true. Although Joe, as we know, is much more fleet of foot than Peyton Manning. A little higher RAS score, let's say, than Peyton Manning had there. But yeah, I like that. That's pretty funny. Dan always brings the humor and the funny comments and all kinds of stuff. But thank you everybody for tuning in again. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel and on the Believe network. So go get the BLEAV in Cincy, CINCY podcast channel through your favorite audio streamer. Subscribe to that, leave us a review. We appreciate that. And of course, do the thing with YouTube, Facebook, etc. Keep it to both cincyjungle.com and where John is covering the Bengals and AFC North at A-to-Z-sports.com as well for your news, opinions, analysis, everything on the Bengals and the AFC North. Check it out, and we'll see what happens tonight. Let's hope no injuries and we get a little clarity on the roster situation as final cuts loom. So enjoy the game tonight, John. Take care, buddy. Thanks for hopping on before the game here. It's good chatting with you.
Let's close the preseason out.
Let's close it out. Take care.